Welcome to Your Cyber Path, the podcast that helps you get your dream cybersecurity job by sharing the secrets of experienced hiring managers and top cybersecurity professionals with you. Now, on to the show.
I run a couple of companies. You run a couple of companies as well.
Yep.
And we're not going to put that level of effort to protect our stuff because we're not holding nuclear secrets in launch codes, right?
Right.
We are holding corporate proprietary data. And so there is a level that we need to protect, and we want to be good stewards of the information we hold of our customers and all that kind of stuff. But we're also not going to spend $1 million to protect a $10 asset. Instead, we are thinking about the anticipated resources of the attackers who are going to go after companies our size. And generally, it's going to be what a basic penetration tester is going to use. Is there an open source exploit out there? Will it be exploitable by something like Metasploit? And when I look at the the CVSS and the reports that we see for a particular vulnerability, it will tell you there is a publicly known exploit for this. Yes, well then I'm worried about it. If there's not, I'm not as worried because now we're talking 0 days, and those things are worth a lot of money, and people aren't usually going to waste a 0 day on somebody my size.
They're not going to burn a 0 day on us. It's not worth it, right? Because for them, that's like launching $1 million missile to kill a fly.
Yep. And so these are the things you have to think about, right? The value of the asset and what is available to the person who's most likely going to attack you. And yes, you are taking some risk, but if we can get to the 90% or 95% solution and spend $10,000 a year, but to get to 100% would cost me $100,000 or $1 million a year, I'm probably going to do the $10,000 solution, right? As long as that meets my legal and compliance requirements to make sure I'm protected.
Yeah, and that actually goes over to a concept which I'm not going to unpack fully here because I've done it actually several times in my other podcast. But reasonable cybersecurity is what the Federal Trade Commission in the United States says we are all obligated to practice. And their definition of reasonable comes back down to what is reasonable for an organization like yours, right? Considering the type amount of data that you're collecting and your size and your sophistication. So if I'm running a pizza joint and I'm using credit cards, if I'm taking credit cards so people can buy their slice, I'm not going to be compared to a bank. I'm not going to be expected to have bank level security for my pizza joint. I'm going to be compared to other pizza places. And, and if I'm like wildly out of step with other pizza places, like if people are giving me their credit card and I'm taking a photograph of it and storing it in iCloud, okay, well, I'm clearly out, I'm not in step with everybody else. Right. So I'm being unreasonable. So anyway.
And I think I mentioned this on the podcast before, but for those who are interested in what Kip just talked about, this actually goes back to a 1932 court case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. I love pulling out random things, but it's actually called the T.J. Hooper case. And I'm pretty sure I talked about this on the podcast, but essentially there was a boat that was carrying cargo going up the Mississippi River. They didn't have a radio on board. Storm came out of nowhere. The ship went to the bottom of the Mississippi. They lost $1 million in cargo, which is a ton of money in those days in 1932. That would be like, a couple hundred million probably today. So it's a huge amount of money. The person whose cargo it was went to the shipping company and said, hey, your ship sank. You owe me the money for my cargo. Give me my $1 million. And they go, no, not our fault. Act of God. We can't control the weather. And they went all the way to the Supreme Court with this. And what the ruling was, hey, ship. Most ships at this point, like 80% of the industry, had radios. If you had a radio, you would have known that storm was coming. You would have gone back to port. You wouldn't have been at the bottom of the Mississippi. The cargo would have been safe. So therefore, since you didn't practice reasonable industry care, which is what you're talking about, if you're a pizza joint, you need to do what other pizza joints are doing. If you're a bank, you got to do what other banks are doing. Having that reasonable level of expectation and protection. If you don't, you can be held liable for that. So as a pizza joint, you should, if you have a Wi-Fi network, it should be password protected. It shouldn't be open if your cash register's on it. If you have a small network that has your point of sale terminals, you want to make sure there's a firewall protecting you from the outside.
That's right.
Basic things like that cost very little money, you're expected to do, but you're not expected to have, government grade encryption and top secret vaults and Faraday cages and all that because you're a pizza joint, right? You don't need that. So those are the kind of things you have to think about there. So anyway.
Absolutely. And I've seen a lot of cybersecurity people get themselves in twists because they're working for a non-bank. And they get mad because the non-bank won't go up to bank level security, right? Yeah. And I'm just like, dude.
Well, I have this problem a lot as well, coming from a military background. Sometimes I have to go, hold on, dummy. This isn't the government anymore, right? You don't need that level of protection because that's going to cost way too much for what you're doing, right? And ridiculous. Even I see this a lot with a lot of veterans that we bring in or a lot of IT or cybersecurity folks we take in from the military. And I have several on my staff. Including my CTO is a former veteran as well. And I have to sometimes remind them, like, look, we're a training company. We're not the NSA. We don't
Right.
need that level of protection.
Right. But they've been trained to be twitchy when
Yes.
they don't have a certain amount of protection. And so,
Which
so
is fine when you have Uncle Sam's checkbook, but I don't have Uncle Sam's checkbook.
That's right. That's right. This is Uncle Jason. He's got different economics.
Yes. My economics of scale are a little different than the U.S. military.